but some Argentinian staffer behind the bench said something early in the game, and said it in Spanish. Obviously Luka knows Spanish. Luka heard that, and for the rest of the game, while Luka is absolutely lighting Argentina up, he's letting that guy know about it. So he definitely is one of these dudes who he looks for stuff, and frankly, sometimes Luka makes it up. Sometimes, you see the way that guy looked at me. He wouldn't even, like Luka will find a reason to get fired up and to get pissed off. But again, he is absolutely at his best when he has that rage and that wrath that's properly channeled, right? And again, it's funny, wrath and joy for him can be very related. There's joy in his wrath, right? That he likes nothing. I really think Luka loves nothing more than being the enemy in a road arena and ripping the heart out of an entire fan base, an entire city.
Tim MacMahon is a sports writer and journalist covering the NBA for ESPN. He's also the integral part of the Hoop Collective podcast. But today we're going to be discussing his book, The Wonderboy, Luka Doncic and the Curse of Greatness, fresh off the press. Tim, welcome to the show.
Howdy, partner. Really appreciate you having me. Now, you told me this is a podcast for really intelligent people, but you invited me. So I am a bit confused. I did spend 8 years in college, so that does make me twice as smart as most people.
But, and you wrote a book. Come on.
There's not a lot of big words in it, though.
I mean, the curse of greatness sounds pretty neat. Come on.
Hey, it's, I'll say this. Luka Doncic is an absolutely fascinating player, person, and the situation in Dallas that now obviously has come to an end for Luka. I mean, so much drama, dysfunction, twists and turns. I'm still, as a lot of people are, trying to wrap my head around the fact that it's over, that the Mavericks decided to end Luka Doncic's tenure in Dallas. That was a plot twist I did not see coming, a way I did not see the book ending, but here we are, and Luka is thriving with the Lakers, and the Mavericks are doing their best to pick up the pieces and move on.
We're going to talk about all of that in just a sec, but I'll give you that. This is a bit of a departure, this episode. I'm not going to lie. We usually discuss something like Napoleon's bad table manners or something, But it's also true, and I've let it slip quite a few times, how obsessed with basketball I am. And moreover, as a Slovenian lad, I had that childhood dream that many Slovenian lads do when they are young of becoming basketball superstars. And of course, Luka Doncic is the living embodiment of those dreams. Now, there might be like a Balkan listener or two who will scoff at the idea of, what can an American sports analyst tell us about one of our very own? But the simple fact is that up until the point that Luka was playing in Europe, that might have been maybe true, but ever since he left for the States, it's clearly not. Also, as you know yourself, Slovenian or Balkan journalists have next to zero access in the NBA. However, you obviously do, and that's why I'd love to talk primarily about Luka's NBA career, which leads me to my very first question. Luka declared for the NBA draft in 2018, and he did so as probably the most accomplished European prospect ever by a long shot. I mean, he was the EuroLeague's MVP at 18, for God's sake. And yet he was only the third pick, I believe, after DeAndre Ayton and Marvin Bagley III.
Right.
How come?
Well, and not only was he the third pick, but three teams passed on him. The Mavericks, after tanking to get him, fell to fifth in the lottery, and then, they were able to move back up to three because the Atlanta Hawks also ended up passing on him. And it really is interesting because, look, as you said, he was the most accomplished European teenage player ever. And he had won at the highest levels of European competition. I mean, at 17 years old, the co-star alongside Goran Dragic, when you're Slovenians, won Eurobasket. And I try to put that in perspective for people, here in America. I say, hey, it's like if there's a tournament where every state enters, and Idaho wins it, like Slovenia, this tiny little country beating these established powerhouses. And Luka going head to head and outshining established NBA stars in that tournament when I don't know if he could grow a mustache yet. And then, just the fact that he's in the Real Madrid rotation, much less starring, and then winning EuroLeague MVP, EuroLeague Final Four MVP. But there were a lot of questions about him. One, a lot of NBA people really didn't know what to make of him. Not very many people thought he could play point guard in the NBA. They didn't think he could be a primary ball handler. He's not athletic enough, and he's not explosive. Obviously, there's a defensive concerns, but I had one executive with a team that was pretty high up in the lottery tell me, yeah, he's going to be a good player. He might make a couple All-Star games, like a playmaking forward, Hito Turkoglu type of guy. I mean, Luka's rookie year would have been the best year of Hito Turkoglu's career, But so I do think he was misevaluated, and and he was also battling the intel about him. And look, just to be clear, I think the Dallas Mavericks made an insane decision to trade this guy. All right, let me just be clear with that. But the conditioning concerns, hey, those are legitimate, and they've been legitimate throughout his career, and they were part of the pre-draft process. Hey, this guy, he doesn't really love the conditioning. He doesn't love the preparation. He likes to have a good time, and there was concerns about essentially, is he going to get fat and happy once he got NBA money? I think his ruthless competitiveness somehow really got underrated. I think his playing ability got underrated. And then it's just their circumstances here. You don't think Igor Kosheskov wanted to draft this guy? Are you kidding me? The guy who coached him on the Slovenian national team that benefited from his brilliance and witnessed it on a day-to-day basis as Slovenia is making his run to the Eurobasket title. The Suns hired him as their head coach, and he had zero say in the draft process. Igor tried to talk Robert Sarver, and at the last minute he said, look, you didn't ask. I just got to get this off my chest. This guy's going to be a superstar. He's the best player in the draft. We've got to take him. And he even laid out, we draft him. We sign Clint Capella, this lob threat, this pick and roll partner. Sign him to a big offer sheet. The Rockets won't match it. Luka, Booker, Capella. And Sarver kind of, thanks for the input, buddy. Go sit in the corner. We're drafting DeAndre Ayton, this 7-footer who, went to Arizona, Robert Sarver's alma mater, obviously right in the shadow of Phoenix. Anyway, so Igor had no hope of getting the Suns to make the smart decision there. Vlade Divac, Balkan basketball legend. I was told he knew too much in terms of the intel. And honestly, Vlade didn't believe that Luka was going to be that type of player. And they had De'Aaron Fox. He wanted to, Luka's going to need the ball. We can't take it out of Fox's hands. And draft night, they take Marvin Bagley III. Vlade says, better player and better fit. Well, as Luka pointed out when the Mavericks played the Kings late last season and Vlade was back as a courtside guest, Luka put the finishing touches on a win, and I'm sure you've seen the tape. He's going back to the bench. That guy should have drafted me. Well, he's right. And then the Hawks, they had, there was debate, Luka or Trae Young. They would have taken Luka if they'd have stayed at that pick. But they felt like getting another lottery pick in the deal was worth it. And the Mavericks pounced on the opportunity, obviously, to move up. Donnie Nelson was pounding the table for him. Bob Voulgaris, who nobody really knew was involved with the Mavericks at the time, but absolutely had Cuban's ear, was saying, hey, this guy's going to end up being an MVP candidate. Now, he thought it'd be 5 years down the road, not in year 2, but this guy's going to be a James Harden type of player. And that's one thing that Bob and Donnie agreed on. There weren't a lot of things, but that was one. They got Cuban on board, and the Mavericks got Luka in Dallas, and it was a damn good decision.
What did you think of Luka before his rookie season about how he's going to fare in the NBA?
I'll be honest with you. I don't really do a whole lot of draft prep. We have people at ESPN, Jonathan Gavoni, Mike Schmitz at the time, who's now a Portland Trailblazers assistant GM. But these guys focus on the draft year round. Like they can tell them, they could tell you right now, if you had them on, you'd say, hey, what do you think of the best 15-year-old Slovenian prospect? And they could tell you all about him. So, I'd heard of Luka. I knew that he was a guy who was kind of on the radar for the Mavericks, but I'll be honest with you, I wasn't like watching Real Madrid at the time. It's funny, since Luka's arrived in Dallas, now like I do pay a lot closer attention to Eurobasket and all that stuff. I went over in the summer of 2022, went to Germany, went to Cologne and watched group play. So I kind of got the atmosphere and, felt that. But I'd seen clips. I didn't know a whole lot about him, and they told me, this guy's got a chance to be really good, probably going to come in and play small forward. And, so I was, okay, we'll see. But I didn't know a whole lot about him until he got here.
The title of your book is Wonderboy. What makes Luka such a unique basketball talent, in your opinion?
Man, I mean, first and foremost, it's just the way that he feels the game. And, talking to one of his youth coaches over there in Slovenia, he said, that's the way he put it. It's like he just has that thing you can't teach. It's just a natural feel, right? Like some people see it and I'm blanking on my guy's name, but he was with Union Olympia. He said some people see it. Luka feels it. The great ones feel it, and he just does. Like he just, people always talk about the way he plays at his own pace. He plays at whatever pace he wants to play at. He forces opponents to play at his pace. You can't speed him up. Then so you've got a combination of just this feel, this basketball brilliance where, again, he sees things 3-4 steps ahead. Even compared to the vast majority of NBA players, and look, he's not your jump out of the gym, win a foot race type of athlete, but Luka Doncic is a hell of an athlete. He's huge, especially for a guard, right? 6'7", 6'8", when he's in shape, 245, 250, sometimes a lot heavier than that, but strong as a bull. And his athleticism, he has the best breaks of anybody I've ever seen at his size, right? And again, it's similar to James Harden. Like when he went to P3, this place in Santa Barbara where they do all this diagnostic testing of guys. They said you put the graphs of Harden and Luka. This is when Luka was a teenager. You put them over the top of each other, and it's basically it's matching. Unbelievable breaks, the ability to, be going full speed, to stop, to be completely on balance, that ability to decelerate, stay on balance, make plays off of that, the combination of the breaks, the strength, the touch. There's not a whole lot of guys. He might be the best combination of power and finesse that we have ever seen. Obviously, then just the skill. And like there's a lot said about Luka's work ethic. You don't develop his kind of skill without working at it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't develop the ability to shoot like that, to the tough shot making ability, the step backs, the crazy finishes in the paint. All of that combined with the vision, the fact he can make any pass in the world because of how he sees it, because of his size. There are passing windows available to him that the vast majority of guards don't have. And then the other thing he has that you're either born with or you're not is that ruthless competitiveness. Luka won't only rip somebody's heart out, but he will enjoy doing it. Like I always say, Luka operates at these emotional extremes, and sometimes his emotions do get the best of him, especially when he kind of overheats with the referees, right? And he's acknowledged that. Hasn't necessarily improved it, but he's acknowledged it. But Luka's either smiling or snarling, and sometimes it's a combination of those two things. You know what I mean? But like it's funny, like last night he comes back to Dallas and they play the tribute video, and Luka's really like he's breaking down, tears flowing down his face. And he was asked after the game, like, what really got you about that video? He said it was the shot that he hit over Rudy Gobert in the Western Conference Finals, that game winner, right? And that was just the epitome of the Luka Doncic experience, right? Because it's so much like, holy, I'm not going to curse, holy smokes, the skill, right? The skill, and then the step back to the right, something that he had barely done, unbelievable shot, clutch moment, and then just the snarl, and as Luka said, he said some Slovenian stuff to Rudy in the moment, which made me realize I know a whole lot more Slovenian than I thought I did. I thought the only Slovenian words I knew were pivo and havala. But the MF and all that, I know those words too. But again, skill, cojones, ruthless competitiveness, size, strength, vision. It's a very, very unique package.
It was quite an interesting contrast, moving for us, especially in Slovenia, probably, to see him like cry yesterday, watching the tribute video. Because, like you said, usually we see his, usual ruthless assassin self. But speaking of psychology, what makes him go off on the court? What makes him tick?
Well, and there's two different kinds of going off for Luka. There is the properly channeled wrath, and then there's the ranting and overheating, right? And then there's the joy. So, but in terms of like the referees, and usually when he's going after the referees, it's maybe not even necessarily about the refs. He's just frustrated, and the refs are a convenient target. Sometimes it is about the refs. A lot of times he's frustrated. He's ran at the refs. And aside from conditioning, Luka's biggest flaw is a lot of times he'll focus more on the three guys in the gray shirts than the five guys on the floor for the other team. Now, the properly channeled wrath, Luka always will look for a reason to feel slighted, for a reason to be mad. Don't be the opponent who talks trash to him. And and guys have learned. I don't know that a whole lot of guys are talking too much trash to Luka in the NBA anymore.
But that sounds a little bit like Michael Jordan, doesn't it?
Oh no, it's definitely that same sort. Kobe, Jordan. It's that sort of ruthless competitiveness where they are looking for a reason to feel slighted. They're looking for just any little shred of motivational fodder that then they'll take a little crumb and make it into a mountain. How many times have you seen Lanny got kicked out the other night in Oklahoma City for one of the fans? But how many times have you seen Luka pick out one particular fan courtside and, you said, okay. And then it's every bucket and he's just going back and forth with that guy and, the rest of the game. I remember talking to some of his Slovenian teammates, and it's the opener, the Olympic opener. They're playing Argentina, right? And it's the COVID Olympics, so it's pretty much an empty gym. But some Argentinian staffer behind the bench said something early in the game, and said it in Spanish. Obviously Luka knows Spanish. Luka heard that, and for the rest of the game, while Luka is absolutely lighting Argentina up, he's letting that guy know about it. So he definitely is one of these dudes who he looks for stuff, and frankly, sometimes Luka makes it up. Sometimes, he'll, you see the way that guy looked at me? He wouldn't even, like Luka will find a reason to get fired up and to get pissed off. But again, he is absolutely at his best when he has that rage and that wrath that's properly channeled, right? And again, it's funny, wrath and joy for him can be very related. There's joy in his wrath, right? That he likes nothing. I really think Luka loves nothing more than being the enemy in a road arena and ripping the heart out of an entire fan base, an entire city. Seriously, I'm thinking about the elimination game in Minnesota last year. Think about Game 7 in Phoenix number one seed Suns. They've been chirping all series long. Luka, last time he walked up that court, everybody act tough when they up. Remember all that?
I mean, that photo when he's looking at Booker has
Yeah,
become a meme on the internet. I
right,
mean,
right.
I
And
send it to my friends all the time. Like, we can't have enough of that stuff.
yeah, and he's
It's so
basically
funny.
looking up, and you can see the thought bubble. You got anything to say now? But Game 7, the guy outscored the number one seed by himself in the first half in a road Game 7. And it was over at halftime. It was over at the end of the first quarter. That, I think, is when Luka is the most comfortable. And honestly, that was why I wasn't sure what to expect when he returned to Dallas last night. And he said himself in Oklahoma City the night before, he knew it was going to be emotional, but he wasn't sure how he was going to handle it. And then they play the tribute video, and he's obviously tears are flowing down his face. And you could see, especially when LeBron embraced him at the end of the line there, Lucas resting his head on LeBron's shoulder. He needed a moment to regain his composure. And I wasn't sure how he would respond to that sort of emotion. I know how he responds to hate on the road, or to venom. I didn't know how he would respond to that kind of love, and more so from the fan. Obviously, there's no love lost between Luka and the upper ranks in the Mavericks organization right now, or ever again. But especially from the fans. But boy, did he respond! And again, he was able to regain his composure and kind of channel all that emotion the proper way. And again, you get back to the ruthless competitiveness and the skill. When he got Anthony Davis, the guy who was traded for him, when he got him on a switch midway through the fourth quarter and, kind of got in his bag, and it was like with Gobert, got him dancing, got to that step back and hit that step back three on him. I think that gave Luka 14 points midway through the fourth quarter. It was like, okay, it's going to be one of those nights.
All right. No, there's another massive talent coming from the same neighborhood, so to speak, and that's Nikola Jokic, 3-time MVP. Should be 4 after this season, if we're being objective, which I'm totally not, of course.
It won't be 4. I think it'll be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's first.
Yeah,
but
I know he's the
Joker
favorite.
Absolutely has a case.
He's crushing it. Also, NBA champion, already regarded as one of the best centers of all time. Obviously, they're not playing at the same position, but if you compare the two, what are some of the similarities and some of the differences that you see between them?
I mean,
as players,
I think the biggest similarity is just, again, that combination of size, power, finesse, and genius, right? These are two of the most intelligent basketball players that we've ever seen. And by that, I'm talking about just the way they process the game, the way, they can catch the ball and immediately know where everybody is and where the chess pieces are going to move before anybody else on the floor does. Both of those guys, as brilliant as they are as scorers, look, 50-point games, 60-point games. Luka obviously led the league in scoring last year. To me, the passing is what separates them from essentially everybody else in the league, and that's what has made Joker one of the best players of all time. That's what's really put Luka on the path to being one of the best players of all time. And that, to me, honestly, is the most entertaining aspect of their games. Both of those guys, they make passes where you're gasping as the ball is in the air, right? Where you had no idea that pass was even a remote possibility until it's already out of their hands. And you're like, oh my God, how did he see that? Sometimes how did he see it and how did he get it there? But they're just mind blowing with the way that they feel the game. Again, it's not just seeing it, the way that they feel it. And then obviously the biggest difference is where Luka operates at these emotional extremes that I'm talking about. Joker is as even keel as you will ever find. Have you ever seen Joker yell? I don't know if I ever have. He made that pass. I forget who it was against. But it was this unbelievable pass where He threw it, over his head, behind his back, over his head, blindly hit Aaron Gordon recently. One of the best passes of the season. Oh, it was against the Bucks because Lopez was back there, and Lopez is looking one way. The ball's going right over his shoulder, almost hits him in the ear the other way. And again, it's one of those passes where as the ball's in the air, and so everybody in the arena is reacting. It's, oh my God. And Joker, his eyebrows didn't raise. He didn't crack a smile. So the biggest difference is just where Luka is so demonstrative with his emotions and really wears them on his sleeve. Joker's complete flatline in that regard.
Okay, we gotta talk about the big elephant in the room. I don't think I'm the only person that feels that the more time passes from that fateful, what was it, February 1st or 2nd, the more bizarre the trade seems, especially from the Mavs perspective. Your colleague, Brian Windhorst, recently called it malpractice on their part, I believe. Now, one thing that is certain is in this story is the fact that Luka didn't want to be traded and felt totally blindsided and betrayed by what happened. We talked about the 2018 draft before and what a scoop getting this type of generational talent was for the Mavs. So I'm wondering what made the organization go from, hey fellas, we totally lucked out, to let's get rid of this guy behind his back, followed by a bunch of pretty brutal shots fired on his way out, stuff about his conditioning, his weight, and his lack of defense.
Sure. Listen, number one, understand all the people involved with drafting Luka are either gone or no longer have any say, right? And so you're primarily talking about Mark Cuban, who he sold the majority share of the franchise last year. When he did that, he told everybody he was keeping control of basketball operations. That's not the case. He clearly did not. He has no more say than any other rich guy who has a courtside season ticket right now. This never happens if Cuban's in control. Cuban, I would say, rightfully or wisely, made kissing Luka's butt the priority for 6 years. And then, as you said, they stabbed him in the back. Well, Cuban had no control. Cuban tried to talk Nikola Harrison out of the trade, but by the time Cuban found out it was even remotely a possibility, it was done. Donnie Nelson was fired by Mark Cuban. They had a massive fallout. This doesn't happen if Donnie Nelson's the GM. Bob Voulgaris, he left after this whole Game of Thrones thing played out in the front office. As much as Luka didn't like Bob Voulgaris loved Luka's talent and sure as hell wasn't trading him. He thought Luka was one of the most talented basketball players in the history of the game and a guy who everything in the franchise needed to revolve around. I would argue rightfully so. So, Nico Harrison had the ultimate decision-making power. Nico Harrison and Luka Doncic had a fraying in their relationship, right? They didn't have a relationship this year.
Do we know why?
Well, a lot of it goes back to, and again, I get into this in the final chapter that wasn't planned in the book and didn't even make the early copies because they were already printed at the time of the trade. But when you fire and run off all the people or a lot of the people who Luka doesn't only like, but respects and trusts, and I'm talking about behind the scenes people, Casey Smith, one of the most respected, if not the most respected person in the league in terms of athletic trainers, the guy who was in charge of the health and performance group, the guy who was there for 20 years, Dirk Nowitzki's one of his very best friends, hired once his contract ran out with the Mavericks after being forced to sit on the couch for a year, hired by Jalen Brunson's Knicks. Luka loved him, respect, a guy who went to Slovenia every summer, a guy who was a massive part of Luka making this huge cultural transition from a teenager who grew up in Europe to not only America, but to the NBA. You fire Casey Smith in August of 2023. And honestly, at the time that happened, I was like, ooh, this is going to be something. And then it didn't develop right away. the Mavericks managed to go to the finals last year. So, okay. But Casey Smith got fired. Scott Tomlin, who was their longtime head PR man, another guy extremely close to Luka. After Casey Smith got fired, Dirk Nowitzki said to Scott Tomlin, another one of his best friends, hey, get out of there. Come work for me. This isn't our Mavericks organization anymore. So Scott Tomlin's now executive director of the Dirk Nowitzki Foundation. Scooter and Casey were probably the two people in the organization who spent the most time with Luka. And then after the finals run, they fired two other people who spent a ton of time with Luka, who Luka knew and trusted and respected. Jeremy Holsopple, their strength coach, Casey Spangler, the manual therapist. And so you're basically intentionally running off all of these people who Luka considers his friends and he respects and he trusts, and you're bringing in Nico guys. Yeah, there's going to be a breakdown in the relationship. There's going to be alienation. Now, again, to be very, very clear, Luka did not want out of Dallas. And you saw the tears flow last night. Like he has said it and you saw it. Luka absolutely was planning to spend his entire career in Dallas. There had been fear in the organization that if they couldn't build a contender around him, that, he might almost be pushed to change his mind. But they did. They went to the finals. Nico Harrison decided he didn't want Luka to spend his whole career in Dallas. And then, so the fraying of the relationships combined with the conditioning concerns, the 4 calf strains in 28 months, the fear that, it's going to be something worse, the belief from Nico Harrison that the body was going to break down. And then Nico's has this, obviously Kobe was his guy. Like he's tight with Kobe, this Mamba mentality, and that's the standard. And if you're not doing it that way, you're doing it, the wrong way. That's the culture that he wants. And look, man, Luka's a ruthless competitor. That has not translated into like this commitment to diet and the conditioning and all those kind of things. Like in practices, if you want Luka engaged, it has to be a competitive situation. It's a flaw, but it's also like, hey, he's a 5-time first-team All-NBA selection who's yet to hit his prime yet. He averaged 34, 10, and 9 and took a team to the finals. But these are the things that led to Nico deciding, I don't want Luka. I want to dump this guy. I want to get one of my guys in here. Anthony Davis is my guy. And then Nico managed up to Patrick Dumont, who's barely a year into owning an NBA franchise, who frankly doesn't know whether there's feathers or air in a basketball, and convinced him, this guy's not committed to us. This guy doesn't fit our culture. His body's going to break down. We cannot give this guy a supermax contract. That's going to be a terrible investment. And that's how the trade happened. And I'm explaining to you the thought process behind the trade. I am not co-signing on that thought process, to be very clear. We can go into all the flaws in that logic, but that was the thought process that went into it.
2 reasons that were cited by Nico Harrison for the trade were culture and defense. You mentioned both, actually. Now, Luka's defense could often be better. I don't think anyone is denying that, not even in Slovenia.
Sure.
However, this culture thing is a bit elusive for us Europeans, I believe. What exactly did Nico Harrison mean by culture?
Again, a lot of the stuff that I was just referring to,
like the Mamba mentality,
and the
commitment in the gym.
Yeah, and the fraying of their relationships, where Luka not only wasn't a Nico guy, but honestly, it was a bad dynamic between those guys by the end. And I'm not blaming Luka for that, to be clear. I think Nico made it an adversarial relationship by all those things that I just laid out to you, by running off the people that he did, by just a lot of things. But like, for example, like the last road trip when Luka got traded midway through a 5-game road trip, the Mavericks and Nico and the Mavericks medical people were insisting, you need to be on the road for this trip. You need to be with the team. Now you're planning to come back, and the target date was February 8th. And Luka and his body team, and his management, his agent, and his business manager were like, no, Luka's going to be at home ramping up for his return. Luka doesn't need to be on the road traveling and hoping to get in the gym for maybe an hour after a shoot around or a practice. He's going to be doing 2-a-days at the practice facility. He doesn't need like this makeshift medical stuff that you can put together in hotel rooms on the road. He's going to be at the practice facility where they've got all the technology laid out. That's where, and so there's just this total disconnect. And that was kind of the final example of the disconnect where, Nico Harrison and people with the Mavericks are, oh, he's holding us hostage. And, Luka's people are, no, he's doing, like, we're putting him in a position to best prepare for his return. But the communication was awful when it existed at all. And there's just such a disconnect there. But again, despite that disconnect, it wasn't like there wasn't any doubt that Luka was going to sign that Supermax extension this summer, right? The man was closing on what was going to be his American Forever home. He lost the earnest money. I mean, he'd put money down already. And the Mavericks knew this. They had been informed because it was a deal where they were buying this house off the market and they were given a heads up. Hey, Luka's house is going to be hitting the market. This is why, like, don't worry. He's in Dallas. Like, he's getting a new house, they were informed. It wasn't, hey, is Luka going to sign that Supermax? It was like, oh no, we don't want to give him that Supermax. And again, even if you want to trade the guy, the best thing you can do is give him the Supermax. You got to wait a year and a half to trade him in that case. But if you have him on a Supermax and he's locked up long term, you don't have to shank him in the back and blindside him. You don't have to keep it a secret so his agent doesn't find out and can't influence things. You just put him on the trade block and let the whole league know and have the biggest bidding war in the league instead of doing it in secret. Where Rob Pelinka says, hey, I can't give you all I got to hold back a bunch of stuff. We don't know if he's going to like it in LA. Guy might not like sunshine. I mean, who knows? Maybe he doesn't like the beach and glitz and glamour and playing for the most, one of the best franchises in professional sports. So the fear of the Supermax was one of many, many, many flaws in the approach by the Mavericks here.
Mark Cuban said, yeah, go ahead.
Just straight up, like, if they're right and Luka's body breaks down, he still would have had immense trade value. Look what the Nets got for Kevin Durant.
But they traded for Anthony Davis, whose nickname is Street Clothes, and then he got injured. I mean, he's a great player, but he's injured a lot.
And he was hurt. Luka was hurt at the time of the trade, but so was Anthony Davis. And Anthony Davis aggravated that injury in the third quarter of his Dallas debut. There's a lot of flaws here. There's a lot of where you just look at the logic and you're like, dude, this doesn't make sense.
I just want to say that Mark Cuban said something surprisingly insightful in my opinion, because I don't believe any of this other stuff that he's saying about selling the team and still believing he will run basketball operations. I mean, the guy's like a total business shark. He's on a show called Shark Tank. Yeah. However, in regards to the trade, he said the following: the biggest mistake in trying to understand Luka was that he's from the Balkans and it's just a different mindset. They look at the game differently. They look at life differently. That fact was not considered as fully as it should have been. And other than his basketball talent, Luka was just like every other guy. That was one of the reasons he loves to play with the Slovenian team. He relates so well with all the other players from that part of the world. That's who he's hanging out with over the summer. And so I don't think we truly took time to understand that. What's your take on that?
That's Cuban basically saying, Nico didn't take time to understand that. and I think a little bit on, Jason Kidd was also quite frustrated with Luka by the end, to be clear.
I mean, do you believe that Jason Kidd didn't know anything about the trade? I mean, not consulting your coach is a bit far-fetched. It sounds like a tall tale.
I'm quite skeptical on that.
Okay, right, yeah.
Quite
but go on, what did you want to say about... Sorry, I interrupted.
Where was I?
I asked you about the Mark Cuban statement about not... They didn't consider Luka's background and, him coming from the Balkans and so forth.
Yeah. And I hear that. I think Cubans sort of stereotyping Balkans a little bit there as well. Because really, listen, what you're talking about is, hey, the man likes to, he likes his meat and potatoes and, help me. I had some of those dishes in the Balkans. I think I gained 10 pounds during my week in Slovenia because I enjoyed some pivo and I enjoyed, God, I can't pronounce them. But, I at least hiked to the top of Smarna Gora, but at that restaurant up there, I had certainly a Slovenian dish.
That's not a really tall. Okay, that's not a tall one, but it's something. I'll give you that.
Hey, I was tired.
Okay. Sorry,
But,
no shade.
I think does Luka like to eat? Does he like to drink beer? Does he like to drink wine? Of course he does. I think there's a bit of the stereotype in there of like all Balkans have this, like the issue with Luka was the weight fluctuation, which is, gets back to the conditioning and all that. Joker made a commitment to his conditioning pretty early in his career, and he's been one of the most durable players in the NBA. Dirk's not Balkan, but he's European, and he was an absolute fanatic when it came to diet and conditioning. Like Goran Dragic was one of the best conditioned players. I mean, he had no issues.
Yeah, he was ripped.
Yeah, he had, and he was playing for the Miami Heat, where it's like the demands on conditioning there are higher than any franchise in the league, and it was like a leader in that organization and thrived in that organization. So I'm a little uncomfortable with chalking this thing up, just totally calling it a cultural thing. I mean, what's the other biggest sport in Slovenia? Cycling, right? I'm pretty sure those guys are in damn good shape. It was a Luka thing, right? And Nico and Luka just weren't on the same page. And I think it did become personal. I think Nico let it become personal, let it become petty. And honestly, was Luka defiant? Would he, was there some defiance in him? Absolutely. But as a general manager, I think you've got to let that stuff go. You can't get caught up in that because you know what? This is not a corporate situation. This isn't a deal where the manager's the boss and everything. If you're not on the same page with him, you're out. No, this is a players' league. This is a superstar league. And when you get a guy like that, I'm sorry. Everything revolves around him. You've got to do everything you can to make him happy. His happiness absolutely should be the franchise's priority. And really, Luka, by NBA superstar standards, he's not on the extreme end in terms of high maintenance. To make him happy, really, the one thing he needed was a chance to contend for championships. The Mavericks gave him that. He was good. He was going to be here forever. So, all the other stuff, I don't think it was I think it was personal differences. And I don't know that I don't know that I would just say it's about, Nico didn't understand Balkans. I'm not going to let him look that easily.
In your opinion, how bad are Luka's conditioning problems? And also, why is it so hard for him to stay in shape?
So here's the thing. Yes, there are issues, and the weight does fluctuate, and you see that, and the calf strains are a concern. Also, the man played more minutes than anybody in the NBA last season when you combine regular season and playoffs, while putting up an unprecedented stat line, 34, 10, and 9, basically, leading the league in scoring while averaging almost a triple-double. Coming off of a summer where he played in the World Cup, going right into a summer where he played in Olympic qualifiers. The man played 100 or so games in a 12-month span. The condition concerns are legitimate, but they're outweighed by the production. They're out, and this is the first year he's really missed a lot of time. Before that, he had been he'd missed some games, but he'd been available. And then the thing is, with a lot of guys, when you talk about conditioning, you say, well, if he would just commit to this, he has this sort of potential. We never were talking about Luka's potential because it was proven. He'd produced at historic levels. So I'm not going to say that the conditioning concerns aren't merited, but what I'm going to say is the production outweighs them.
Okay, so you don't think that if Luka suddenly shows up completely shredded, he would sort of unlock a whole new level to his game, something we've never seen before?
I think that Luka has left some meat on the bone, so to speak. And look, there have been summers like coming out of I think it was going into Luka's fourth year, I believe, maybe third or fourth year, where he like when Luka's working out over the summer, it. You just got to check his Instagram feed because he'll show it, right? And it was that summer, and he's showing a bunch of workout pictures, and his old teammate Courtney Lee at the time commented on one of his Instagram posts. He says, "Skinny Luka gonna be a problem." So there have been times where you've seen Luka put the work in, and you've seen him come in svelte. And so yeah, I mean, could this all-time guy who's on the path of all-time greatness maybe become even greater? Yeah, I think that's certainly a possibility. The other thing though is you don't want Luka necessarily slimming down a lot. Like, I think his peak weight, like his best weight, would be about 245. The people who have worked with him, a lot of people who worked with him have told me the same. Because, again, you don't want him to weigh 225, 230 because his power is such an important part of his game. But, the conditioning, it is about like, hey, the calf strains are a concern. How much is the weight involved there? It's about the durability going forward. But I just, he's already produced. Like, if you put his numbers up against everybody else who's ever played the game at the age of 26, he's right up at the top of the list.
Last two quick questions, Tim. When researching this book, what surprised you the most about Luka?
I don't know necessarily if anything really surprised me. I really enjoyed my trip to Slovenia and talking to people involved in that, because that's the part I didn't really know about. And so I think the thing I learned the most about is just how important loyalty is to Luka, right? And I think you saw that last night with the tears streaming down his face. But again, it's not only that he plays for the Slovenian national team every single summer, every single game, every time he can, but it's that he plays for Slovenia at all, right? Because he had a Spanish passport. He's of Serbian descent. The Serbia thing is a little bit more complicated, but he had never played in an official tournament for the Slovenian national program until Eurobasket. So going into, before that, if he wanted to play for Spain, an established European power, he could have, but it was never something he considered because he's Slovenian. That's his homeland. That's his blood. That's where he wanted to be. And that's who he wanted to represent. And that's who he wanted to spend his summers with. And again, to me, that shows you if Luka loves you, he respects you, he trusts you, and like he keeps a tight circle. But if you're in that circle, he's going to be loyal to you. And to the city of Dallas and to the Mavericks as a whole, he felt that sense of loyalty, and it was not reciprocated at the end.
If LeBron keeps playing for a couple of more seasons, which seems kind of nuts because he's almost 41 and yet he's still playing like better than 95% of the other guys in the league. Do you think it's possible that they'll win a chip together?
Oh, sure. Sure. Listen, it's possible this season. I don't think it's likely. I think there's still a transaction cycle or two away. If they get a legit starting caliber, rim running, rim protecting, lob catching center. But, again, it's not impossible this year because any series that they play in, they will have two of the three best players. And they might have 1 and 2, 1 and 3. They're going to have a chance. And we'll see how long LeBron can continue to play at this level. But he's already defying, any concept that you have of the way that a basketball player ages. I mean, at 40s, he's an all-NBA player. Luka's just entering what should be his prime. And by the way, all this talk about conditioning, if
LeBron doesn't get you into shape, who will?
Well, but I'll say not even necessarily that, because he could have followed Dirk's routine. He could have followed Kyrie's routine. He's had a roadmap. The motivation, boy, did the Mavericks hand him some motivation. The way he was slapped in the face for the world to see, if he doesn't lock in on that stuff now, because I think it does that ruthless competitiveness I think you've tapped into that now. But yeah, no, they're absolutely going to have a chance. The other thing, when you are playing for the Los Angeles Lakers, one of the great perks is it's not hard to recruit talent. Everybody wants to play in LA. The Lakers for ages have had a massive advantage in being able to get players there. And listen, there's going to be, especially those type of centers, will be lining up to play with Luka for the Lakers.
Very, very last thing. You had a little verbal tussle with Luka. I believe it was last year when he was like, "Oh, you're only writing bad stuff about me," or whatever. Yeah. What's your relationship with him now? You guys grabbing beers together yet?
We are not grabbing beers. I do often say that I think our post-game routines are way too similar for his good. You know what, though? Like, hey, we've had a few back and forths in those kind of settings, and that was when there was the Devin
the fan ejection thing.
Yeah, and he felt like me reporting it was intended to make him look bad. It's like, no, dude. Like, if you have an emotional meltdown in the middle of the court, it's one of the best players in the league, and like the guy was sitting literally like 2 rows behind me. I could have reached out and smacked him. So I heard everything. I'm like, so my job's not always to, write flattering things. It's to report fairly and accurately and in the proper context. I feel like I've held up that end of the bargain. As far as my relationship with Luka goes, I shook his hand last night and said, "Hey, man, I wish you the best luck the rest of the way. Hell of a performance." He said, "Hey, hope everything's good." It was a 10-second conversation. We had a conversation about a week after that Booker fan incident. And obviously, look, the fans in Dallas are always going to take Luka's side, and like I still hear about that. I still feel the wrath of the fans, whatever. It didn't make Luka look good, like, nationally. And I talked to him, and I just said, listen, I gave him the whole fair, accurate, proper context. I said, if you don't think I'm holding up that end of the bargain, if you think something's inaccurate or not fair, context isn't right, I'd really rather have a conversation behind the scenes instead of with a public audience. I think it's the best for both of us. And he shook my hand. And honestly, for the rest of his time in Dallas, we were fine. He's not inviting me to his birthday parties. But
me neither.
He doesn't need me to be his buddy. I don't need him to be my buddy. I would say we had a cordial, professional relationship, and I'd like to think that will continue, although I won't be covering him on a day-to-day basis. Certainly no hard feelings on my end.
Do you think he's going to read your book?
You know what? I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know how much Luka read anything that I wrote. I don't know. Like, there are a lot of players who read everything, and then there are a lot of players who hear about things from people around them, but they don't actually read the stuff. So they'll hear about 2 sentences, or they'll scroll Twitter or Instagram and see what's aggregated, which is like 2 sentences out of a 3,000 word story or whatever the case may be. So I honestly, I have no idea how much Luka actually reads any coverage of him, much less whether he would actually read 118,000 words.
Well, I certainly will. Tim, thank you so much for this conversation. It was amazing. Where can we get your book in Europe?
So there is going to be a Slovenian translation. And boy, you've caught me off guard. I don't have. Oh man, let me try to find the publisher here. I don't have the publisher's name right handy. It is one of the major Slovenian publishing companies. Okay, I might botch the pronunciation.
Yeah,
I want to say Uchila.
Uchila, yeah.
Uchila International. It will be publishing a Slovenian translation of this.
What about the rest of Europe? If you want to read the book in English, are you shipping it
in English,
to Europe?
You can go to the easiest way is probably to say go to Amazon. It's available in ebooks. There is an ebook available internationally. I'll be honest with you, I'm not quite sure about like shipping of a hard copy internationally. I will say there's also an audiobook. If you get a copy that doesn't have the 19th chapter, which was not planned.
The trade.
Go to my X account. Pinned is a link with proof of purchase. You can get that chapter emailed to you via PDF. It was certainly a plot twist, and there's certainly a lot there.
We'll attach the links. Again, thank you so much. I know we have to run. I hope we get to do this again in the future.
All righty. Hey, I really appreciate you having me. Havala.
For listening, please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I've been told on countless YouTube tutorials that I have to say this, otherwise nothing happens, which is strange. Also, if you feel like it, support me on Patreon. I'm playing the world's smallest violin here, but this is a one-person pod. I have no production team, no nothing. So feel free to hop on Patreon and find smart cookies on there. And then last but certainly not least, I have to thank my existing patrons, Tovarishin, Tovarishice. Without you, this podcast simply would not exist. So thank you so much. That makes you actual producers of this show. So eternal thanks to Darej, Rok Tržan, Sasha Vipotnik, Neven Cvijanović, Juž Premrov, Nate Sirk, Goran Ivašić, Anže Sever, Ole, Marin Ferrara, Dejan Žolnir, Aljaš Maher, Štrole, Aida Mancian, Miha Medved, Medinho, Goran, Gordon, Lorenzo, Jurečuk, Mila, Carmen, Veronica, and Tai Chi. You guys rock. Thank you so much.